Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm doing a first impressions video on Destinies by Lucky Duck Games. Now, Lucky Duck as a publisher is probably most well known for its Chronicles of Crime series, but I'm going to put its other games that are well known up there. The same with the designers and artists. The designers for this one are Micah Golubiowski and Filip Milensky, and the artists are Karolina Jedrzejczyk, Magdalena Lechenska, and Irek Zielensky. This is an adventure game, an exploration game, fantasy themed. It's got dice rolling. It's got role playing in it. You can kind of adjust your stats as you go. You can play it solo. And interestingly enough, this game is designed for 1 to 3 players, which is an odd player count. But there was an expansion you could get through the Kickstarter, which was called a 2x2 expansion, and it made it into a 2-on-2 game, a 2v2 game, which essentially brought the player count up to 4. But that means that 4 players can't play it competitively one-on-one. They all have to be playing in teams 2x2. So that is not an expansion that I included in my pledge. I did, however, order everything else, including the playmat, which amounts to the base game. And the base game includes 1 scenario that is a tutorial scenario, and then 4 scenarios that are linked into a campaign. So 5 scenarios total. Then the stretch goals were kind of all put together into an expansion called the Myth and Folklore expansion, and that is an additional 3 campaign scenario. And then there was another expansion that you could add on called Sea and Sand, and that is an additional 3 scenario expansion. So essentially, if you bought all those things, you have 11 scenarios total. 1 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3. So my pledge for all that stuff was $120 for a playmat and 11 scenarios. I think even when I was pledging Destinies, I was a little unsure of what it was. I thought, oh, it's a narrative themed competitive exploration game that kind of has RPG elements, and it has this really cool kind of QR code scanning technology that Lucky Duck sort of perfected with the Chronicles of Crime series, and now they're going to use it with this narrative exploration game, and it sounds really cool. Sometimes there are questions, I think, lingering in one's mind, especially in an app-driven game, because the rule books don't explain a lot of things. So when you're looking at that Kickstarter campaign, you may be trying to understand the gameplay, and it's not really there. I mean, it's not in a rule book, and the app doesn't exist yet, so you can't really see what it is. So you have some ideas, you know, well, I'm going to move, I'm going to explore, I'm going to do these things. They're describing it to be like Mansions of Madness. I like that game. So it's going to be like that and Chronicles of Crime. Okay, that sounds really good. And I think you have to take a leap of faith sometimes with a game like this. I think even then now, though, as people are reviewing this game, there's not a lot of information out there because they don't want to show you too much. They don't want to spoil the storylines or the campaigns. And it's kind of hard to show you gameplay when it's sort of in the app. Like, how do you show that? So I'm going to do the best I can to show you the gameplay. And let's demystify this process a little bit so you have an understanding of what this game is. Something that I think is hard to figure out right now, and then you'll know if it's a game for you. Anyway, let me show you how it looks on the table and kind of how it functions, and then I will tell you what I thought about it. So here's essentially the setup for Destinies. I've got the player board here set up for a 1-player game. I don't know, is a point of confusion, I guess, is that when you're looking at these games that are kind of app-driven, a lot of times the rule book is very minimal, and it'll just say, oh, you're going to do this and this and this. The app will do these things. It'll, work this. It'll do this thing for you, and you're flipping through rule books, and it just kind of has you always referring to the app. And so you don't even really know what the gameplay is really going to be like because so much of it is behind this nebulous wall of the app and the app-determined gameplay. So I'm going to show you what you're actually doing in this game, component-wise, how things kind of work, and to kind of break down that mystique a little bit. So first of all, let me just show you this. This is the game box, and actually Rodney Smith showed it off pretty well. But it's got some miniatures down here. The miniatures are tiny, the size of a fingertip, although there are a few different bigger ones. And you've got slots in here for these nice, thick cardboard type coins. Like this, that's your currency in the game. Over here, you've got slots for these, which are experience points. Although whenever you take these, each one of these experience points lets you positively affect 2 points of skill on your player board, either 2 points from the same stat or 1 point from different stats. So technically you don't really even need these tokens. You could just automatically adjust your player board whenever you get those. Now here you're gonna have a compartment for all the tiles in the game. These are the tiles for the rest of the base game. I already have the tiles set aside that are used in the tutorial. And then underneath it, you can see here there are dice. Here's some player cards. These are little markers you're gonna use on your player board. And then down here, you've got these little tokens that will come out. You'll place these on the map in various places. I'm just gonna set 2 aside for now. And then there are these other little, these markers, and there's 2 of each of these. And so the idea is if you drop an item, or if you find a vendor who's selling items, you can put one of the tokens on the board in that place, and then the other token on a card off the board. And then you'll know that later if you want to go buy something, that's where it is. Or if you want to pick up something that either you or another player dropped, you can do that at that location. Anyway, there are 2 different plastic inserts to go on top of this. One will cover everything, and then you can put the little player boards on top, and then another one will go on top of that. So none of these pieces will be shifting around in storage, which is a good thing, and it's definitely a positive for the game. Also, you've got this big playmat. If you ordered this, theoretically it can fit all the tiles in a scenario. I don't know, I've only played the tutorial several times, and the tutorial is essentially 4 squares by 3 squares. So you're only using a part of this for the tutorial. You're also gonna have a couple decks of cards. These are sort of more general cards. There's multiple copies of all of these. So there's 2 different types of cards, which I just have split into 2 different decks. One has the really common items, and there are many of each of these cards. Vendors will sell these things. You can find them various places. And then you have a smaller deck of these other cards, which have red tops, and they're more expensive. And I think there are only 1 each of these cards, so they're unique. And generally you kind of get them through a quest. They also have player abilities on them that say always, so they kind of give you an ongoing ability that you can always kind of use, which is great because a lot of the other regular cards have abilities where you discard it to use it. So you're either kind of like using the card for whatever it does, or you kind of get rid of it and use its special ability once and then it's gone. It's gonna set up a little bit similarly to something like the 7th Continent. And when you first set up the beginning of the scenario, you're gonna put the central tile here. It's flipped over to the white side, and then you will surround it on all 4 sides by the adjacent tiles, but they're on the kind of dark, unexplored side. And whenever you move into a location, like let's say if I were to go here, I would flip this over. The app would tell me all the little things to put on it, which might be some of these tokens I was showing you earlier, which will denote different locations. And in the app itself, it'll tell you what those locations are. And then you'll place tiles in any spaces that are orthogonally adjacent to the tile you just flipped over, and you'll put those on their gray unexplored side. So the beginning tutorial tableau of cards only gets to be 4 cards by 3. So it's a small little area. And let me show you your player boards. So when you start the game here, you're going to have the choice of 3 characters. The witch, the huntsman, or I think the noble. That's for the tutorial. And then campaigns will have their own choices of 3 different characters. You're going to place these little markers on your stat tracks where it says to place them. And then you will take 2 main dice and 3 effort dice per person. You can put them in the little ready circle, although generally these effort dice do not start the game as ready. And then most players will also start with a coin, or at least in the tutorial they do. On your turn, you're going to be able to move up to 2 spaces away orthogonally if the tiles have already been placed. So at the beginning, if you're moving, you can only go onto one of these unexplored tiles, and then you'll flip it over and you'll explore it. But if there were more tiles out, you could go, let's say 1, 2, and then explore that tile. So the first thing that'll happen on your turn is you'll click that it's your turn on the app. Some event may occur, something may happen. Usually you'll get to exhaust one of your effort dice. Then you'll move. You will flip a tile over if you're going to an unexplored tile. If not, you'll just go onto a tile. And then you can interact with something on the tile. Usually it's a location. Sometimes it can be a little miniature, like this priest that starts out the game right there. And let's be clear, these are the minis. They're tiny. They're like the size of my fingertip. So they're okay. I mean, they're cool to look at, but they're very, very small. There are a few other bigger minis in the game. This is the biggest mini. I don't know which, he's probably part of the main campaign, so he's significantly bigger. And then there are some that are in between in size, but most of the minis are these tiny little miniatures. I mean, like 7th Continent miniatures size. Anyway, and then the third thing that you'll do on your turn is you will interact with something, usually these things that have been placed on the board. So like, let's say I flip this over, I might get a couple little locations on the board that I can interact with if I'm moving here. And it'll say specifically what that is in the app. And then when you interact with that, there'll be a series of things that you can do. Sometimes you might be able to ask somebody about the destiny on your card. And then when you play a character, you're going to have 2 different things that you can do to fulfill your destiny. So you could ask them about either one of those. Maybe you have an item in your possession and you want to ask them about this item. Or maybe you want to give them this item. Maybe it's something specifically that they need. Or maybe you're just going to talk to them, or you're going to engage in certain conversations or activities that require skill tests. Now, when you're doing a skill test, you're going to be looking at your player board here. So when I'm playing this game, I would be the witch. There are other ways that you can unexhaust dice in the game, usually as a reward for something or a story event, but generally you're going to be unexhausting one of those die per turn, per round. And then these are kind of the starting stats that I have plugged into my player board. And they represent, I think it is, the blue is intellect, the green is dexterity, and the red one is power. So if I'm doing a skill test and I roll dice, and the main dice each have 2 2s, 2 3s, a 1, and a 4. And the purple dice have 3 1s, 2 2s, a 3, and this, which is an automatic hit. So you're gonna roll some combination of your unexhausted dice, and these will always be unexhausted. So you could be rolling between 2 and 5 dice. You'll add up the totals. You'll see, where you have hits on that. So if I were to roll, let's say, an 11 somehow with a blue test, I would get 1, 2, 3 hits. And you'll just plug that into the app. You'll say you had 3 successes, and then it'll give you a result. Usually a result will have you gaining an object or maybe an experience point that you can use to upgrade 2 notches on your player board, and you'll move them left. And so the next time you do a test, it'll be a little easier to fulfill that test. You could gain some information, things like that. Now, it's kind of hard to show this, but because it's not on the ground, but underneath your player board here, there are sort of 5 slots for cards. So they're gonna fit in like that. And if you ever have more than 5 cards, that's okay. You can't hold on to them. You'll just have to drop one where you are. So you have a sort of a hard hand limit of 5 items. And the items will generally either tweak your rolls and your tests, or maybe give you like a one-time ability for discarding a card. But essentially the entire game is going to be you walking around this map and interacting with things, using QR code scanning to do it, and trying to figure out how to achieve either parts of your destiny card, which is giving you like a goal for the game. And once you do that, first, successfully, you will essentially win the game. So this game is very much an exploration game. It reminds me a lot of 7th Continent, but the puzzles aren't as difficult, and they can be influenced by other players. If you're playing a multiplayer game, someone could do something that could kind of get in the way of what you're trying to do. But it's not very take that. That's almost sort of happenstantial. In general, you're kind of just each playing your own heads down game, and you may kind of cross paths. You will be interacting with the same characters and doing the same things. And that's where the game becomes a little problematic, because the components are so well designed, and it's got this app that runs really, really well. It's got a nice player board. The tiles work fine. It's kind of like the 7th Continent meets the Chronicles of Crime. And it's very much a narrative exploration game. Now, if you watch Quackalope's recent video, Jesse played this game in the middle of the night once, and then went crazy with enthusiasm for it, describing how it's now in his top 10. And I think we all do that. I think we all sometimes want to like a game a lot and get a little carried away. And I am going to go back in front of a camera and talk to you a little bit more about what the game does well, but what its limitations are, because it has a lot of limitations that certainly didn't go acknowledged in Jesse's video with Quackalope, and I could see a lot of people rushing out to buy it thinking it's going to be this great game without understanding that there's little to no replayability in this game at all. So let's talk about this a little more away from the board in this setup. All right, let's get down to the skinny now, because there's a lot of cool things about this game, and I think you saw them just looking at it. I think it's a really great idea to make an app-driven exploration game, and I really like the idea of a competitive game that you can kind of play together. In fact, I have another Kickstarter delivering very soon called Legacies, which seems kind of similar. I think it's a competitive narrative themed game. The difference is that Legacies looks like it is very much a Euro, and it uses storytelling elements. But in terms of what's happening, it's going to be randomized. There are mechanics, and it's going to be different every game. From what I know now, it looks like Legacies is something that you will be able to play in a group of players competitively over and over again. I am sad to tell you that that is not the case with Destinies. Despite what may be being communicated to you in other videos elsewhere, Destinies has very, very, very little replayability. And here is why, and this is the most important part of the video and what I really, really want you guys to know before you go out and spend a lot of money on it. So I mentioned at the top of the video that it comes with essentially, I think 11 scenarios, right? So we've got 1 in the tutorial, you've got 4 in that campaign, and then you've got 2 other campaigns with 3 scenarios each. So it's a total of 11. 3 of those scenarios, the Myth and Folklore campaign, which was part of the stretch goals, that is not available yet. So you cannot play that at all. I think it's coming out in the fall. But for now, you can play the 5 scenarios in the base game, and you can play the 3 scenarios in Sea of Sand, which essentially gives you a tutorial, a 4-game campaign, and a 3-game campaign or a 3-scenario campaign with a 3-scenario campaign to come later. But here's the thing. You can really only play each scenario once, really. So if you paid $120 for this and you got a tutorial and 3 campaigns, you basically are going to play 4 games. And one of those games is the tutorial. Now you could break up those games into scenarios. So like that 4-scenario campaign could be 4 games. Either way, let's call it 3 campaigns and a tutorial. That's really all you're playing. You have to look at this as a legacy game, I think, or a campaign game, one that you can't really play again. Now, there are some caveats to that. There is a solo exploration game, there's also a solo challenge game, and then there's this competitive game for 1 to 3 players. And in every campaign, you're going to have 3 characters to choose from, so you can play with 3 characters. But you're all going to be walking around this board, doing the same things, interacting with the same NPCs, taking the same skill tests, basically doing the same thing. There is no randomization. It's not like Mansions of Madness where you're going to choose a character and then rooms and tokens and items and things will come out randomly. Monsters may come out randomly. Things are going to be different every time. I think that's the genius of Mansions of Madness, is that you can play scenarios over and over and over, and there's enough randomization in that game that it's not going to be predictable. It's going to be different every time. You might start to get bored of the same scenario in Mansions of Madness if you play it a lot, because you know what sorts of things are going to happen, but they're going to happen differently, and there'll be enough that happens differently that you're going to react to it differently. You may need different items. Things will affect you differently. So it is a different experience every time. The problem with Destinies, it is the exact same experience every time you play it. That means if I go back and I play it with another character, I mean, if I were to go play a competitive tutorial game, which I did. I played the 2-player competitive game with my fiance. I played the huntsman, she played the witch. I won, and that's another bad thing, because if one character wins and they end the game, the other characters who are pursuing this narrative storyline, They don't get a resolution. They don't get a conclusion. It just ends. They don't know what happens. The game's just over. So if you've been playing this game for an hour or 2 or 3 hours and you're progressing on your storyline and all of a sudden another player ends the game and you're just kind of stuck in the middle, I mean, that's a little bit of a bummer. I think more of a bummer than with a normal Euro game, because in that game you tend to have an idea of who's winning, or at least some idea of how things are going, if someone's doing good things or not. In this game, you're kind of just pursuing your own little story, so you don't really know if someone else is kind of running away with the game or not until they're doing it at the very end. So that's not the greatest thing. But the other thing is, if you play that scenario with a group of people, you now know what happens. You know where to get the items. You know what the vendor is going to sell. You know what the different interactions are going to be with every NPC. That is not randomized. It doesn't change. So when I went back and I played with the Huntsman and I did the exploration game, which basically doesn't give you story events, it just lets you go around and do everything, I was doing the same things I'd done the first time. Now, I was a little more thorough in my explanation because in the first game, the one I played competitively, I rushed the game a little bit at the end because I knew I could win, and I thought if I just kind of dilly-dally around here, Kristen might end up winning, so let me just win. So I did. But when I went back to it, I was doing the exploration, and I sort of thought, I'm just going to explore everything and see everything that is offered here in this little 12-tile tableau. But long before I'd done that, it was just very repetitive. I was doing the same things, and you can only hold 5 cards in your hand, and I'd advanced a lot of my skills a lot, so there was nothing more to be gained really at that point. I still had maybe half of the things I hadn't explored, but there was no reason to explore it. I had things that I dropped all over the map that I could go and pick up if I wanted it, but I could only carry 5 things. So I was just in the situation where I had a wealth of riches, and I knew I could win, and so I just went ahead and won. Then I went and I played a solo game a third time, this time with the Witch. And in this time I played the challenge mode, which only gives you 8 turns to complete your goal. However, every time I achieved a piece of my goal, I got an extra 2 turns, and that happened several times. So I actually was able to win doing the challenge mode on the Witch, a character I've never played before, because I got those extra turns and because I had a very good idea of what I needed to do because I'd played the game before and nothing changed. So playing it on the Witch with a different character history and different goals made it a little bit fresher, but I still knew the NPCs, I still knew the area, I still knew how everything worked. There weren't any surprises. So if I was going to go back and play the tutorial again, even as any character, if I were to play it against other players, because I know so much of how that part of the world works and everything, what it does, it would essentially be a speed run for me while other people were trying to play it for the first time and figure it out. And that wouldn't be fair, right? And even if you played it with people who'd played it before, if it gets to the point where you all know what you're supposed to be doing and you're just speed running through it, that's not very fun. Like, I want to have some kind of exploration adventure in my game, not just who can maximize their efficiency in a narrative storytelling game, who can kind of just get to the locations first and trigger these things. It's a heavily diminishing law of returns for Destinies. And so I'm going to go through the intro scenario one more time with the Noble, with the third character I haven't played yet, but I don't really expect any surprises. I already know everything that's going on for the most part in that tutorial scenario. And from what I can tell from everything I've seen before, the campaigns are going to work the same way. So you're going to play that campaign once, and you're going to get all the way through all 4 scenarios, or all 4 games if you want to break it up into different sessions. And then once you've seen it, you can't really play it with other people who haven't played it before because you're going to have a huge advantage. And even if you play it with people who've played it before and you choose different characters, so much of the game is the same that it's almost not worth playing again. So I think you really have to look at this as a sort of 3 small campaign game. And you're going to play each of those campaigns once, and then you're going to be done with it. Maybe you'll pick a character and you'll go play solo with a character and you'll kind of fiddle with a little bit to try to get more out of it. But you're just doing the same thing over and over. Now, as a game system, I think this is really interesting because they could put out more expansions for it. And they're also working on a tool so that people can kind of create their own scenarios. And all of that is really interesting and neat. But I think the central problem with this game is without more mechanics in the game, without more crunchiness in the game, and without randomization in the game, in the world, and in the events and the actions and the things that are happening, like in Mansions of Madness, without that thing, you are just replaying the same thing over and over, and it becomes pointless after you play it through once or twice, maybe. And I think that's something that people need to know. So it is a very fun game to play with a sense of exploration and discovery the first time you go through any scenario or campaign. But there's not going to be a lot of replayability in this. So just know that, for instance, for me, I paid $120 and I'm going to get to play 3 campaigns, and then I'm probably going to sell it. I don't regret it. I will enjoy playing it when I play it, but this is not a game that you're going to be able to bring to game nights and play over and over again as a competitive game. It's just not going to work that way. You can really only do that once per campaign, and even then, I think the players who don't win, it might feel kind of deflating for them to make this investment into a storytelling narrative game, and then at the very end of that experience have the rug pulled out from them, have the game be over, and not even have any resolution to your story. There's so much in this game to like, from the design and the components and the packaging and the ideas behind it, but it needed another coat of paint or several more coats of development. It needed something to make it much more replayable, and it's not. So I just want people to know that if you want to go in and you want to have 3 one-time campaigns and enjoy yourself for those campaigns, I think you will, and I think you'll have a great time doing it. But this is not a game that you're going to keep around and play over and over. Hopefully, Legacies, which is totally unrelated, will be that game, because that looks like a fun game. I'd like that game. I want a game where I can play competitively, because that's rarely done. Usually it's cooperatively for a narrative exploration game. I like the idea of a competitive game, but it needs more work on it. It needs more coats of paint if it's going to actually have replayability and not be a one and done. And essentially that's what this is. Now, if you're a huge Lucky Duck Games publisher fan, you kind of already maybe have accepted that with Chronicles of Crime. Although I would argue that in Chronicles of Crime, there's actually more replayability, because as the cases get harder, you can replay them more and more and try to solve those little side quests or the little other things. And it still has a limit. I think the hardest case in Chronicles of Crime, you might get half a dozen plays out of until you've kind of done everything. But I think for a scenario in this game, you're only going to get at the most 3 plays out of it, playing once as each character. And by that 3rd play, it's almost not going to matter that you're playing a new character. It's just that repetitive. So I think if the game didn't have that replayability issue, I might rate it 8.5 or something like that. But considering that issue, and again, this is a first impressions video, so I will come back and do a full review once I've played the campaigns. Although I think I intend to do that once I launch my Twitch channel, and that will be later in the year, and Myth and Folklore will not have the app available for it until the fall. So I probably won't do a full review on Destinies until the end of the year. My score may change at that point. But if everything that I'm saying right now, that I'm seeing, that I'm understanding, that I think I'm understanding is true, and it's a one-time experience, 3 campaigns for $120, 3 short campaigns, I can't see me really giving this game more than like a 6.5, and it's only getting that high a score because it's so well produced and it has such nice components. So those are my feelings on Destinies, and I felt like when I saw this super effusively enthusiastic video by Quackalope that I needed to put something out there to, if not warn people, to at least give them all the information that they need to make a buying decision. So this is me doing that. So I think I've done that. I think I finished this video. When I do finish the campaigns, which hopefully you'll be able to see me play eventually several months from now on my Twitch channel. But eventually I'll come back and I'll do a review. And if my opinion of it grows, the score will grow. But I don't think the replayability is going to change. And if it doesn't change, I don't see the score changing, because my score being as low as it is, in the 6 range, is specifically because of the lack of replayability in this game. Thank you very much for stopping by. Thank you for listening to my thoughts on this. Hopefully I helped you. I feel like this video could be an eye-opener for people, and if they see it and they understand that and they want to play, they want to go out and buy the game, more power to you. Go enjoy it, but just know what you're getting into. And if people see this and they kind of understand about the lack of replayability, and maybe it stops them from making a purchase when they could go out and buy Mansions of Madness or Legacies or some other campaign game that's going to kind of have more play to it and more replayability, then I'm happy I was able to provide that service. So thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. So I'll see you in another day or two with that Maglev Metro First Impressions video. And until then, have a great time gaming, however you're doing it these days. Take care.